The moment my sister's car disappeared around the bend, I realized she wasn't coming back. Not in 5 minutes. Not after she'd had her laugh. She was actually gone. I was standing outside the Greyhound station in Raleigh, North Carolina, at 9:30 on a Thursday night in January, with $23 in my pocket, no phone charger, and 4% battery left on a phone that had been dying since we left Charlotte. My carry-on bag was sitting on the concrete next to my feet because I'd set it down to look for my charger in my purse. The charger that was, I would soon discover, still plugged into the outlet in my sister's car. And that's when she'd leaned out the window, laughed and said, "Let's see you figure this one out, Hannah." Then she drove away. I stood there for probably 30 seconds before it hit me. The cold air coming off the street smelled like diesel and cigarettes. A man in a yellow vest was pushing a cart of luggage past me like nothing had happened, because for him nothing had. I picked up my bag. I walked toward the entrance doors, and I thought very clearly, my sister's name is Bridget. She's 4 years older than me, which makes her 34, and she has been testing me my entire life. That's the phrase she uses, testing. She says it like it's a gift. Like all the times she's humiliated me or left me stranded or told me I was too sensitive were actually lessons she was generously providing. When I was 12 and she told everyone at Thanksgiving that I still slept with a stuffed rabbit, she said she was testing whether I could handle embarrassment. When I was 19 and she convinced me to apply for a job at her company, only to have her boss tell me she'd never actually recommended me, she said she was testing whether I could handle disappointment. There was always a reason. There was always a framework that made her the teacher and me the student who kept failing. What I didn't understand, standing outside that bus station in the January cold, was that I had been letting her grade me my whole life. The trip had started 2 days earlier. My mother's 65th birthday was coming up, and my aunt, my mother's sister who lives in Asheville, had organized a small family gathering. I live in Richmond, Virginia. Bridget lives in Charlotte. The plan was for me to take the train down to Charlotte, spend the night, and then the two of us would drive together to Asheville the next morning. It was supposed to be a nice thing. A sister's trip. I'd agreed because I thought maybe it would be different this time. I'm 29 years old, and I still think things will be different. The drive to Asheville was fine. Bridget was in a good mood. She played music I actually liked, and she bought me coffee at the rest stop outside Morganton, and for a few hours I let myself believe that we were normal, that we were just two sisters driving to see their mom. The party was nice. My aunt had made her lemon cake, which my mom has loved since they were children. My mother cried a little, which she always does when she's happy, and my uncle made his same 3 jokes, and my cousin's kids ran around the backyard until it got dark. I felt okay. I felt almost good. The trouble started on the way back. Bridget and I were supposed to drive back to Charlotte together on Thursday, and then I'd catch the train back to Richmond on Friday morning. But somewhere around dinner on Wednesday night, Bridget started in on me. It was subtle at first, the way it always is with her. A comment about how I'd been so quiet at the party. A question about whether I was doing okay in that tone she uses, the one that sounds like concern but functions like a probe. By dessert she was telling our cousin that I'd always been the sensitive one, and not great with people, and laughing when she said it, like it was a funny and affectionate observation, rather than something she'd been saying about me since I was 7 years old. I didn't say anything. I smiled and ate my cake and told myself it didn't matter. On the drive back Thursday, she was quiet for the first hour. Then, somewhere past Statesville, she started telling me about a woman she works with, who she says takes everything too personally. She described this woman in detail, how she overreacts, how she makes everything about herself, how exhausting it is to be around someone who can't just let things go. I kept my eyes on the passenger window. I knew exactly what she was doing. I'd known her for 29 years. "You know who she reminds me of?" Bridget said. "I don't want to do this," I said. "I'm just saying you'd probably have a lot in common." "Bridget, please," she smiled. I could see it in the reflection of the window. "You're so easy," she said. I barely even said anything. We stopped for gas outside Canopolis. I got out to stretch my legs. When I got back in the car, she asked if I wanted to stop in Raleigh to get dinner. She knew a good place, she said, near the bus station. I said sure. I didn't think anything of it. She pulled up to the Greyhound terminal on West Jones Street and stopped the car. "It'll be faster if you grab your bag now," she said. "We'll park down the block." I got out. I pulled my carry-on from the back seat. I was standing on the sidewalk looking for my phone charger when I heard her laugh. "Let's see you figure this one out, Hannah." The car moved forward. I thought she was joking. I thought she'd pull up 10 feet and stop and get out laughing and say gotcha. And I'd pretend to think it was funny, and we'd go get dinner. And I'd spend the whole meal feeling vaguely sick but acting fine, like I always did. I watched the car move down the block. I watched it reach the intersection. I watched the left turn signal come on, then I watched it turn left and disappear. I stood there in the cold for half a minute, maybe less. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I picked up my bag and walked inside. The Greyhound terminal at night is one of those places that is neither welcoming nor hostile. It's just there, fluorescent and waiting. There were maybe 15 people in the seats, most of them with their eyes closed or their headphones in. A vending machine hummed near the far wall. At the ticket counter, a woman with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses was working through some paperwork. Her name tag said Donna. I went up to the counter. I explained that my phone was about to die and I needed to figure out how to get back to Richmond, Virginia, and that I had $23 in cash and no way to charge my phone. Donna looked at me over her glasses for a moment. Then she said, "Honey, do you have a card?" I did. I had my debit card. I'd just forgotten that I had it, because my brain had gone somewhere very simple and very unhelpful the moment Bridget's car turned left. Donna waited while I found it in my wallet. She did not make me feel stupid for not thinking of it myself. "Next bus to Richmond doesn't leave until 6:15 in the morning," she said. "That's about 8.5 hours. You want me to look at the route?" I said yes. She found me a ticket. The bus would go from Raleigh to Richmond with one stop in Durham and one in Petersburg, $47 and change. I put it on my card. She printed the ticket and handed it across the counter, and then, without me asking, she reached under the counter and produced a phone charger. "We keep a few," she said. "People leave them. You can charge up at that outlet by the water fountain. Bring it back when you're done." I thanked her. I went and found the outlet. I sat down on the floor next to the water fountain because the seat nearest to it was taken, and I plugged in my phone, and I put my face in my hands. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but I didn't. I just sat there with my face covered and let myself understand what had just happened. Bridget had planned this. Not entirely. I don't think she'd had it in mind since Charlotte. But somewhere on that drive, when I wouldn't engage with the baiting, when I'd said please and meant it, she decided to do something that would force me to engage. She'd told me to get my bag out of the car. She'd waited until my hands were full. She'd made sure I had no charger and no easy way to call for help. And then she'd driven away and left me at a bus station in a city I barely knew, in January at night. Because she thought it was funny. Because she wanted to see what I'd do. Because in her mind, this was a test. My phone came back to life at 11%. I had 14 text messages. The first was from Bridget, sent 4 minutes after she'd left. "Don't be dramatic, I'll come back in an hour, lol." The next 12 were from my mother, my aunt, my cousin, and 2 numbers I didn't recognize, all sent in a chain after Bridget had apparently texted the family group chat something along the lines of "Hannah's doing a solo adventure in Raleigh, haha." There were laughing emojis. There were people asking if I was okay. There was one message from my aunt that just said, "Bridget, what on earth?" And there was one from my mother. "Call me when you can, sweetie. I'm sure it's fine." I read them all sitting on the floor next to the water fountain. Then I turned the screen off and sat very still for a while. I'd grown up watching my family treat Bridget's cruelty like weather, something to work around, to account for, to joke about afterward. That's just Bridget. My mother had been saying my whole life, the same way you'd say, "That's just how the pipes are in this house," as if it were a fixed feature of reality rather than a choice someone kept making. My father, when he was still around, used to say Bridget was high-spirited. My aunt called her a handful, and laughed. My cousin, who I actually like, once told me I needed to stop letting her get to me, which is the kind of advice that only makes sense if you believe it's the person being hurt who holds all the power. I had believed that, for a long time. I had believed that if I could just get better at not reacting, better at letting things slide, better at being the steady and unbothered version of myself that everyone seemed to want me to be, then Bridget would eventually stop. That I was the variable. That I just hadn't figured out the right configuration yet. I thought about that sitting on the floor of the Greyhound terminal, and I thought about all the times I'd gone home after a family event and spent 3 days in a low-grade fog that I didn't have a name for. And I thought about the way I'd felt in the car when she'd started in on me, and I just looked out the window and said please, like asking permission to be treated decently. And something in me went very quiet and very clear. At 11:50, a woman sat down next to me. She was probably in her mid-50s, with a burgundy travel coat and a small roller bag that she tucked neatly between her feet. She looked over at me, took in whatever I looked like and said, "Long night?" I said yes. She nodded. She didn't ask anything else. After a minute, she pulled a granola bar out of her coat pocket and held it out to me without looking up from her phone. "I've got two," she said. "You look like you haven't eaten." I hadn't. I'd forgotten about dinner entirely. I took the granola bar and thanked her, and she just nodded and went back to her phone. And I thought that this woman, whose name I didn't know, whose life had nothing to do with mine, had done something kinder for me in 30 seconds than my sister had managed in 34 years. Her name turned out to be Sandra. She was heading to Durham to see her daughter, who had just had a baby, her first grandchild. She worked in hospital administration. She was funny in a dry, unhurried way, and she didn't press me, but somewhere around 1 in the morning, after I'd returned Donna's phone charger and come back, and we'd been sitting together for a while, she asked me what had happened. I told her. I tried to keep it short. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. "She's done things like this before?" Sandra asked. "My whole life, and your family thinks it's just how she is." It wasn't a question. I said yes anyway. Sandra was quiet for a moment, then she said, "You know what the hard part is? The family that doesn't stop it is part of the problem. I don't mean that to be harsh, but when everyone around you treats something as normal, it's very hard to see that it isn't. You need someone from outside to show you what you've been living with." I didn't say anything. I just looked at the vending machine across the room. "You said she texted you that she'd come back in an hour," Sandra said. "Are you going to wait for her?" I thought about it. I thought about getting back in Bridget's car. I thought about the drive back to Charlotte, the way she'd probably talk about this the whole time, not as something she'd done to me, but as something that had happened, a funny story, an adventure I'd had, proof that I could handle myself. I thought about how my mother would call later and say she hoped we'd sorted things out. I thought about the word sorted, like it was a disagreement about restaurant preferences. "No," I said. I texted Bridget at 1:17 in the morning. I wrote, "Don't come, I have a ticket, I'll get home." She responded 8 minutes later with, "Oh my God, you're being so dramatic," followed by "Fine, suit yourself," followed by a voice memo I didn't listen to. I turned my phone face down on the seat. Sandra's bus to Durham boarded at 2:40. She stood up, pulled on her coat, and tilted her roller bag onto its wheels. She looked at me for a moment. "You doing okay?" "I think so." "Good." She picked up her bag. "For what it's worth, the version of you that's sitting in a bus station alone at 2 in the morning because you chose not to get back in that car, that's not the weak version. That's actually the opposite." I watched her walk toward the gate. I sat there in the plastic seat and felt something shifting around inside me, slow and unsteady, like furniture being moved in a dark room. The next few hours were long. The terminal got quieter around 3, and then started filling again around 5. People arriving for early buses with coffee cups and rolling luggage. I bought a bottle of water from the vending machine. I found a podcast on my phone and listened to half an episode about the history of American road systems, which I retained none of but which was comforting in its ordinariness. I thought about my apartment in Richmond. I thought about my bed. I thought about the fact that in 9 hours, maybe 10, I could be in it. At 5:15 my phone rang, my mother. I looked at the screen for a long time, then I answered. "Hi Mom, Hannah sweetheart, are you all right? I've been up half the night." Her voice was the voice she'd had my entire life. Warm and a little fluttery, the voice of someone who worried constantly but had learned to contain it into specific words at specific times. "Bridget said you wouldn't let her come back for you?" "Bridget left me at a bus station at 9:30 at night," I said, "in January, without a charger, in a city I don't know." And then texted the family group chat about it like it was a funny story. A pause. "She was going to go back for you. She said it was just a joke. I know she was going to go back. I didn't want her to hand Mom." I stopped. I looked at the departure board. "I know you love her. I know you love both of us. But I need you to understand something." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The words came out very level, the way water finds its level. "This isn't new. This is what she's always done. And the reason she's always done it is because everyone, you, Dad, our aunt, all of them, has always treated it like it's funny or like it's just her personality. And I spent a long time thinking I was the problem. That I just needed to not be so sensitive." I paused. "I'm not the problem, Mom." Silence. "I know she can be hard on you," my mother finally said. Her voice was different now, smaller. "I've always known that. Then why didn't you say something?" She didn't answer right away. I wasn't surprised. There are things my mother knows and has known for years that she's never let herself say out loud, because saying them out loud would require her to do something about them. and she never knew what to do. I don't say that harshly. She is not a bad person. She's a person who learned, probably in her own childhood, that the way you survive difficult things was to smooth them over until they disappeared. The problem is that they don't disappear, they just go underground. I'm sorry, she said. And then quietly, I should have said something a long time ago. I closed my eyes. I hadn't expected that. I sat with it for a moment. I love you, I said. I'll call you when I'm home. The bus to Richmond boarded at 6:10. I found a window seat near the back. The woman next to me was asleep before we left the station, her head tipped against the glass, a fleece blanket pulled up to her chin. Outside, Raleigh was doing what cities do at 6 in the morning, waking up slowly, street by street, the sky going from black to gray to the pale washed-out blue that comes just before real light. I watched it through the window and thought about what Sandra had said. The version of you that chose not to get back in the car. I'd been running the numbers on that choice all night. What I'd lost by making it. What it would cost me. Whether there was still a way to make everything okay with everyone, which is my default calculation. The one I run constantly and automatically. Like background software I installed so long ago I'd forgotten it was there. Somewhere past Durham, I stopped running it. I thought instead about what I actually wanted. Not what would make things easier. Not what would smooth it over. Not what version of events I could accept and move on from. But what I actually wanted for myself from here. And what I wanted was simple. So simple that I was embarrassed it had taken me this long. I wanted to stop arranging myself around the damage. I wanted to stop being the variable that adjusted, so that everything else could stay the same. I thought about the last decade of family dinners and phone calls, and visits where I'd spent the whole time braced, where I'd pre-calculated which topics to avoid and which versions of myself were safe to be, and how quickly I could exit if things got bad. I thought about the emotional hangover I always had afterward, the 2 or 3 days of low-grade exhaustion that I'd never connected to anything specific because I'd been too busy telling myself it was fine. I thought about what it would mean to just stop, to not go to the next one, to not be available for the next test. It was a strange feeling, not triumphant, not even particularly happy. It was something more like the feeling you get when you put down something very heavy that you'd been carrying so long you'd stopped noticing the weight. Your arms don't know what to do. Your posture is wrong. You feel the absence of it before you feel the relief. We got into Petersburg just before noon. The layover was 40 minutes. I got off the bus, found a coffee shop 2 blocks from the station, and ordered the largest coffee they sold and a breakfast sandwich, and I sat in a window seat and ate it watching the street. My phone had a full charge by then. I had 31 messages I hadn't responded to, including 4 from Bridget, ranging from defensive to apologetic to defensive again, in a cycle that I recognized as her version of processing something she didn't want to take responsibility for. I didn't respond to any of them. Not because I was making a statement. Just because I genuinely didn't know what I wanted to say yet, and for once I decided to wait until I did. I called my best friend Cora while I waited for the bus. She'd seen some of the family group chat messages the night before. I'd added her years ago, when she pointed out that she heard about my family events through my stories anyway. And she'd been texting me since midnight, her messages getting increasingly alarmed. I am so glad you're okay, she said before I'd even finished saying hello. I cannot believe her. I genuinely cannot believe her. I kind of can, I said. Hannah, I know. But I think I've been believing she was capable of change for so long that I convinced myself she was a different person than she actually is. She's exactly who she's always been. I'm the one who kept expecting something different. Cora was quiet for a second. Are you okay? Like actually okay? I thought about it honestly. I will be, I said. I think last night was the last time you let her. The last time I put myself in a position where she can. Yeah. I said it out loud and it became real in the way things do when you say them to someone who knows you. Cora didn't make a big deal of it. She just said, okay, the way she says it when she means I believe you and I'm here. Then she told me about a terrible date she'd been on earlier that week, and I laughed for the first time since Charlotte, and we talked until the bus was ready to board. The last leg from Petersburg to Richmond takes about an hour and 15 minutes on the highway. I spent most of it with my forehead against the window, watching the familiar landscape come back, the billboards, the exits I knew, the water tower outside Chesterfield, that I always used as a marker that I was almost home. When the bus pulled into the Staples Mill station just after 2 in the afternoon, I stood up, pulled my carry-on from the overhead rack, and got off. The air was cold but still. The parking lot was mostly empty in the early afternoon. I ordered a rideshare, and while I waited, I stood in the thin January sun with my bag at my feet and my phone in my pocket. I thought about what I was going to do when I got home. I was going to shower. I was going to eat something real. I was going to call my mother back, because she deserved that, and because she'd said I should have said something a long time ago and meant it, which was more than I'd expected from her. I was going to think, carefully and without urgency, about what the next family event was and whether I would go and on what terms. I was not going to call Bridget. Not today, maybe not for a while. And not because I was punishing her. I don't think punishment changes anything. But because I had finally understood something about the way this worked. Bridget would keep testing me for as long as I kept showing up for the tests. That wasn't her dysfunction alone. That was a system we had both participated in, and I was the only one in the system who seemed to want it to be different. Which meant I was the only one who could actually make it different, and the way to make it different was not to try harder to pass the tests. It was to stop taking them. My ride arrived. I put my bag in the trunk and got in the back seat. The driver asked if I was heading home and I said yes. She nodded and pulled out of the lot, and the station disappeared behind us, and I watched the city come up around me. The streets I knew, the intersections I'd driven 100 times, the corner where the good coffee shop was, and I felt for the first time in a long time, like I was returning to something rather than retreating to it. I was 30 minutes from my apartment when my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. It was Bridget. A voice memo, 2 minutes and 43 seconds long. I looked at it for a moment. Then I put my phone face down on the seat beside me, and I watched my city go by outside the window, and I let myself just be on my way home.